So thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to run through our P6-QA tool. This tool was built started to be built about 5-6 years ago. And the intent here was to try and give our clients the ability to self-critique the schedules as they were building them in P6. So I'm joining you today. I'm Nicole Jardin. I'm the CEO of Emerald. I'm actually joining you today from Montreal, beautiful summer day. And I'm going to be running through the software tool live so you get a feel for how you might be able to use P6-QA within your environment. Now, before we jump into the tool, let's just touch on, what is quality. So it's always an interesting conversation when we're talking about schedules and what is a good schedule, what's not so good in scheduling. There's lots of debate. This is why certain groups like AEC and PMI have different standards, different testing, that sort of thing, to make sure people at least understand what scheduling is about and how to put things together. So it does vary. What are your attitudes to what the standard should be? What does your experience tell you? Of course, there's collaboration that needs to take place when you're building schedules. And, if you're newer to the software, you just have a different perspective. Now, when we're talking about schedule quality in P6, generally the foundation, and there's not too much debate about this, is timing. So dates, timelines, that's always first and foremost. Everyone who uses P6 uses it for that purpose. Then, of course, you want to make sure that you have resourcing that can accommodate and achieve the schedule. So that's a very big piece, and not everyone uses resourcing. But I think when Oracle did an analysis a few years ago now, it may have changed, there was about 60 to 70% of users used resources. And then, of course, costs. If you have unlimited funds, you can do just about anything, of course, but that's not a reality. We have to work within budgets. So costs are usually the third parameter at minimum that you're looking at. And people might throw in risks and safety, things like that as well. But these are the main ones we're looking at in P6. And again, when Oracle did some of the analysis, 30 to 40% of users were doing costing as well in P6. So we're going to focus on those, and let's touch on some of the common struggles that we all face in trying to get quality schedules put together around time, resources, and costs. So making sure that what you're putting together is reliable and consistent, especially if you're working with outside contractors that are providing schedules, and you want to understand whether they're achievable, whether things hold together properly, whether they've done their due diligence in putting together the schedules. That's a challenge. That's a big challenge that we face. Understanding whether they've looked at where bottlenecks could occur. And that is really truly related not only to timelines, but whether they've analyzed whether they've got the right resourcing mix, whether the activities are detailed enough to really understand where those bottlenecks occur. And then, of course, whether you've got certain deliverables that you're expecting them to have in their schedule. So we call these business process adherence. So you might have criteria related to naming conventions, perhaps the way calendars are built, what kind of resources you're using, things of that nature. So we have added not only schedule quality, but business process quality metrics that you can measure, you can set up and measure in P6-QA. So it's not just schedule. Now, a lot of people, when they're looking at quality and they're running quality metrics, they end up having to hire third-party reviewers, such as Emerald. So we've done that kind of work. We come in and we help do reviews. But what we really want to focus on with QA, P6-QA, is to allow the team to self-critique, to critique the schedules they're receiving, to be able to do that on an ongoing basis without having to get third-party people like us to do it, or even other software tools that are pretty expensive and generally require only a few users to use them. So we wanted to put something together that made it easier for everyone to be more successful. And those are really the benefits that we think P6-QA brings to the table. It's very easy to use, easy to set up, repeatable, and you don't need to be a scheduling guru to use the tool. And that's more the driving concepts that we built P6-QA off of. Okay, now I'm going to just ask one quick question, and if you'd like to answer, go ahead. If you don't want to, that's all right too. I just wanted to ask, how do you, within your teams, do schedule quality? Do you even do it? Do you do it manually? Do you get outside help? Do you have other tools that you use, or you don't really do it? You maybe do it more on an ad hoc basis. So this is sort of what we've seen with our clients. And okay, so if you've been able to answer, great. I'll show the results on who was able to answer. So let's jump into run through how P6-QA works, and then I'm going to jump in and show you the software. So we've broken down the criteria out of the box to schedule quality and business metrics, and then client-specific types of metrics. Plus, we have statistical metrics as well. So there's really kind of 4 buckets that we've put things into. The first one being schedule quality. So we're looking at the schedule that's been put together, how well has it been put together. So typically when you're looking at schedule quality, you're looking at logic. Has the sequencing of work been done well? Do we have leads, lags? So leads are just negative lags for P6 users. Let's take a look at durations. Are durations very consistently put together, or are they kind of all over the place? So those are pretty basic standards that we're looking at. We also look at constraints. Does the schedule have a lot of constraints? Now, of course, if you have a lot of constraints, it's more of a picture than a dynamic schedule. So that's something you don't want. You want a dynamic schedule that reflects updates dynamically. You don't want a lot of hard constraints and soft constraints. And then we look at the resources and costs. Okay, now they're harder to analyze in terms of order of magnitude of resourcing. That becomes highly subjective, but we're looking at whether resources have been used, how are the costs, and of course we monitor all of those on updates. Okay, so that's kind of in a nutshell the schedule quality. In terms of the industry standards that P6-QA matches, so this is just a quick cheat sheet. So there's many standards out there in the marketplace. DCMA is a big one. Government Accountability Office, GAO, is another. AAC and PMI, there's many different standards out there. And our tool will help you meet those standards and your own internal ones as well. Okay, so that just gives you a bit of a cheat sheet on what you can get right out of the box with P6-QA. Now then, above and beyond the schedule quality, we have business process metrics, and this is where the tool really goes above and beyond other things in the market, because you can input your own, and they're right inside P6, so you don't have to do it in expensive other outside tools. So business process metrics can be many different things because we use our P6 calculator technology inside the infrastructure, which lets us monitor whatever we want. So things that our clients are using it for, they're looking at certain criteria, like are certain codes filled in. So certain project codes or certain activity codes, for example, certain user-defined fields, have we filled them in? So that helps you monitor contractor schedules that have been sent to you that you are looking for very specific criteria. Naming conventions would be another, and I'll show you some of that in a minute in the software. So this really lets you enhance the basic scheduling quality checks to include the checks that you want as a business. Okay, so that's important, especially when you're doing reporting across corporate standards, whether it's CapEx, OpEx, shutdown, turnaround type projects. You can put in different metrics, different criteria, which allows you to analyze what makes sense for each project type. We've done this for IT projects as well, and long-range programs that span many, many years, so that you've got those metrics and you can report on them out in third-party reporting tools like Power BI or Tableau, or business objects, whatever you're using. And then another key thing is to have different metrics depending on the phase of the project. What you're doing at an early phase and the rigor that you have may not be identical to the rigor that you need once a project is approved. So QA lets you do all those things very easily, and it really takes the pressure off the lead scheduler, spreads it out to the scheduling team, and even site engineers and engineers that are closer to the work can run this tool without being P6 experts. So that was our intent, and I think that's really what the tool brings to the table. So I'm going to jump into the tool in a sec. I'm just going to explain the steps. So the first thing we do is we put in the criteria that we want to monitor, we want to validate. Then you run the analysis. It highlights the problems that are there. It highlights them at the project level and right into the activity resource level, expense, and so on. Then you fix the problems and you rerun the tool. Okay, so it's very dynamic, and it's it's meant to be a helpful tool for the schedulers, people in P6 on a day-to-day basis. That's how we set it up. Once you've rerun the analysis, you have reports that you can send out to your contractors quite easily to let them know if there's some problem areas. So you may not be dynamically fixing them depending on how you do the scheduling. Whether if you've built the schedule, you'll fix as you go. But if you're receiving a schedule and you're critiquing it, you would report out, have them fix it, and send it back in. So again, it just depends on how you're building that. And then you would take some snapshots, and that's where we've got our P6 reporter tool, or our data warehouse tool, allows you to snapshot, and then you can run analysis out through your third-party software. And then, of course, you want to be looking at whether, here's an example of some of the reporting that we've done, whether or not they're going in the right direction. So especially on a long-range, large project, you want to make sure that they're improving, the schedule's improving in the early stages, and as they do updates, things are not falling off the rails. So we would report on both of those aspects, and I'll show you those as I jump into the software. Okay, I think that's good enough. So before I jump into the benefits, let's actually run through, and I'll show you the software live. Now, as I'm going through, please, I forgot to mention, feel free to ask any questions. If there's things you want to understand a little bit more, just let me know. Okay, Shannon, how's the size? Does it look okay? Is it legible?
Yeah, I think it's pretty good, Nicole.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Okay, so let me explain what you're seeing here. So I'm in a project view at the EPS level, and I'm giving you essentially a project level snapshot of schedule quality indicators. So what we're seeing here is a whole bunch of projects where the P6-QA tool has been run on those projects. And we're seeing some of the quality metrics that we want to look at. Red is not good, green is good, and there might be, in some cases, a warning, so like a yield sign. So that lets you know right out, very quickly the visuals on how well you're doing. So we want to see something like this. We don't want to see something like this where we've got a lot of red stop signs. Okay. So this is sort of a quick dashboard of how well you're doing. Now, QA can be run in a few different modes. So let me try and explain that here. So I can first decide whether I want to include a project in the running of P6-QA. So you have a yes or no flag there. Now, when you say yes, you have options on how you want the QA to run. So these are different options that you have. So weekly, monthly, daily, manual. Okay. So essentially this one that I'm going to use as my example here, it's going to be manual, in which case I can run it at any point that I wish simply by clearing the P6-QA last run date. That tells QA, go ahead and run it again and run it ad hoc. So that's the way you would run it manually. And then what it's going to do, it's going to go analyze the schedule, and it's going to re-input the last time that it was run so that you have an idea. Okay, so there, it just ran. And I had just run it before the session, so you can see no changes took place in the visuals, but it lets you know the last time this was run. So you can have different timings, which would make sense if you've got different kind of schedules in your database. Let's say you've got turnarounds, shutdowns, those kind of projects. You're going to be running schedule updates, especially during execution, once a day, if not twice a day. So you can run it as I just did there, where it was manual. If I've got a capital program, I may want to do at least once a week before I do my snapshots and my reporting. I want to give my team the chance to make sure they haven't perhaps made some errors in building logic, that type of thing that can happen. That's where the weekly might make more sense. Monthly, if I've got monthly reports that have costs, not everyone necessarily does cost reporting every single week. So these are configurable, and this just gives you a lot of flexibility, especially if you've got a large corporate P6 environment to manage how you want P6-QA to run. Now, let's look at how these were set up. So these are some examples of schedule quality. So we're looking at durations, we're looking at float, we're looking at logic, whether the logic's got some logic missing, so you can see some of that there. And these kind of come together, successors and predecessors go together with logic. So it's not surprising if we've got a red here, we've got some reds on both the successor and predecessor sides. Now, it might not be on both sides, as you can see in this project. It's just some successors are missing. So we've got dangling ends on some of our activities. Now, typically when you're looking at logic, you're looking at leads and lags, so negative lags and positive lags. So we're looking at those. And again, some projects have some and others don't. And if you do have a lag, whether the lag is long. Okay, so we want to look at that. And then logic type, of course. So the idea with logic types is the easiest schedule to understand and manage is one that's heavily focused on finish to starts. So activity A is finished before activity B can start. That is the easiest, clearest kind of schedule to manage and follow. So we're trying to drive our scheduling team into building primarily finish to start type logic. So this is giving us that quality check. And then we're looking at constraints, whether we've got hard or soft constraints sitting there. And finally, whether we've got resourcing across the board. Okay. Now, you might say, well, I don't necessarily want to use all of these metrics. It's very configurable. So let me show you how that works at the project level. And I'll just jump into a different layout. So this layout has the criteria that's feeding the indicators. So let me jump over to that. So each project has the ability for the configuration of what will flag a red, a yellow, or a green. And some of those are just purely yes or no's, but some of them also have an extra criteria with a value, as we're seeing in the duration. So what constitutes a high duration? Now that will depend on the project. So again, when I use an example of a turnaround or a maintenance type project, something that's high might be something that's more than a few shifts long, as in these are in hours. So 120 hours is just a few days. Whereas in a larger, longer capital project, you might want to go with a few weeks, okay? So that's going to be a criteria that you can establish. You can put them on your templates if you use templates within your organization, so the team can follow the general standard, but then as appropriate, they could change that for their project specific, okay? So I may want to bump that down, and then I could just rerun the quality metric. Okay, so as soon as I change any of these, I can rerun the analysis. So the same would hold true for things like float. So this float is 40 hours, which if you're doing 5 by 8, that's 1 week, 1 work week. So again, that is up to you to decide what makes sense on your project. Okay, so I can certainly change that, and let's say it's 3 days, I can rerun the analysis. Now, going along with those are some of these that you can see that are percentages, okay? Now, what this is saying is, if I have missing logic, of course I want to identify that, but I only want it to show a red stop sign if I've got 5%, so 5 activities in 100 that are missing logic. Now, this again is configurable. So if you say, no, 5 is crazy, I want it to be flat out 0, I want all of them to be, it's green or it's red, that's it. You can bump that to 0 tolerance. Okay, so again, you have control over these things, completely up to you within your team, how you want to manage this. Now, if you're just at the very, very early stages of building a schedule, they're always going to be red. So this is where you have the ability to bump that to some sort of percent tolerance. And that's where you can introduce the stage gate phase kind of approach. So you might say that when I'm building a schedule at the beginning, we'll allow 10%. As I get closer to execution, when I've got it approved and funding's approved, I want to really tighten up my criteria. So this gives you this flexibility to do that, okay? So I'm going to bump it to 0 just so you can see it. I'm going to rerun the analysis. And you set those up for all the items you want to monitor, okay? We've got a lot in here. And I'll touch on some of them as I do updating. Some of them will be updating related. So we're monitoring all the layers, the activity layers, the resource layers, expenses. You can introduce steps. So sky's the limit really on how you might want to implement P6-QA. So these are out of the box. but you can add additional ones. And all our clients that use it have some specific criteria that we help set up when we roll out P6-QA. And then from there, they just do all the monitoring. So there's a little bit of consulting at the beginning generally to get the tool configured the way that you want, and then off you go. Okay, so I bumped down the missing logic to 0, and I bumped my duration down, which will probably give me some additional flagging. And let's go ahead and bump the durations down to 0 tolerance. Now, I'll just go back to my last layout at the project level, and I'll just go ahead and rerun the QA on that project. Okay, so I clear it, then I save it, and I refresh it. And I'll go ahead and open it while we're waiting for it to run. And I'll go back, sorry, let me go back. And some of these, maybe I didn't choose a good example because these are all red already. But if they were green, some of them might flip to red because I changed the criteria. So let's actually dig in and see what this all means. Now, the way that you find and understand what's driving these is 2 different ways. So we have a notebook that's first and foremost, we want to give you, let's look at the schedule quality. We want to give you a very, a summary that goes beyond just these visuals. We want a bit of detail inside of here. So we're backing it up with some real statistics and the information. This is where you can take this out and get it into a report, into an email, whatever makes sense for your communication on what is not quite meeting your standard, your quality standard. Again, these notebooks are configurable. And this is giving you a quick hit on what's going on. Now, each one of these digs into more detail. So, for example, the logic with open ends. So we know there's some successors missing. This gives you the list of those successors and missing. So it gives you the list. And you can use this, again, to output to your contractor, for example, to say, here, these are things we want you to fix up. They're not quite meeting the required criteria. Or you can report internally and you can help improve the schedule because you've got the information. Now, of course, if I need to self-critique and make the actual fixes, I want to go into the activities and I want to see these areas that were not quite meeting the standard that we're trying to achieve. So again, we're just taking advantage of P6's great functionality of building layouts. So the layouts are highlighting where we've got high float, where we've got durations that are high, large durations. These are level of efforts. So let's focus on the task dependent. I don't know why this does this to me. Sorry, guys. It's kind of dropping. It's erasing the activity. So here I have 2 that have high durations. Of course, I just flipped my duration requirement from, what was it, 1480 or something like that to 240. So these are probably new that it's hitting that. So if you have an activity with high duration, you have a few choices here. You could split the activity up into more than one activity, which would be a very good idea. I'm a big believer in not getting too fixated on number of activities, but clarity of activities. So in this case, it's a commissioning activity. So I might want to split that into the different parts of how we're gonna commission the extraction area of this project. Okay, so that would be probably the way to fix that, is to break it up into more than one activity when it's a high duration. Now, that's one example. Now let's take a look at the logic. So we know we had some logic issues in here. So I can scroll down, or the other thing I can do is I can rearrange these so they come to the top. So that's something very handy, of course, in P6. So I can see that we've got some missing logic. Sorry, I'll just point at it rather than highlight it. So we're missing a predecessor, right? So pre-commissioning is missing a predecessor, which if you use P6, we usually call that it's gonna dangle, it's gonna be piggybacking the data D. This activity is going to ride the data D because there's nothing controlling when it starts. Okay, so what we'd want to do is, of course, go in here and fix that and get the predecessor in there. So I'm not quite sure what a good predecessor would be for let's take a look at the work packages and see what we've got. So probably installation. So that's generally a missed logic link. So let me go ahead and put the install as, okay, it's probably gonna causing a loop. Yes, okay. So I've made a mistake probably. Pre-commissioning should not generally come before install. So in this case, I found a mistake in logic, right? So I'm gonna remove it here and I'm gonna put it in the predecessor window. And now it's letting me, okay? So that's just making sure I don't create a loop by mistake. So I think I fixed that, but of course this hasn't gone away yet because I'm gonna reschedule. And I can rerun this. So you just get an idea of how easy this is to use. So I clear that out, I get it to rerun with the refresh button, which activates it, off it goes. And looks like it already ran it because the predecessor is cleared out. That's not true, I'm on the wrong activity, it's this one here. Okay, so let's just refresh it. There we go, it ran through and it gives me the green. So this is why we built this software this way, so that the scheduling folks who need to self-critique have a very quick way to identify problems and fix them. Okay. Now you might say, well, I can find open ends out of the box in P6 by putting the predecessor, successor up there. This is true, but you can't find all the things that P6-QA can find for you, as we looked at with the duration. Okay, so yes, some of these things you can find using other methods already. However, P6-QA goes well beyond those basic methods that you have in P6 and gives you the flexibility to build additional criteria. Okay, so I gave you a quick flavor of schedule quality type metrics and how you can run through them. If you truly have an open end, let me just touch on that. So sorry, it's clearing it for some reason. Here we go. So project sanction, this may be the first activity in my system. Okay, so it's a milestone. It's a start milestone. As you can see in this case, it's showing a different visual. It's just giving a warning on a milestone. Here's a successor. So it's the end, it's the startup. So this is how we flag the milestones. And then if you want to override it and say, okay, I've reviewed it, this is genuinely okay, that there is no successor or predecessor, you can override it. That's how we use the blue star. This is letting you let the QA system know that I've looked at the criteria I've seen, it's all right, and it will change the metric on it. So you do have the ability to do an override on any of the criteria. Okay, so let's touch on business process metrics, just to give you a flavor for what some of the business process metrics might look like that you might want to monitor. Okay, and I'll go in and flip to the matching layout in the activity level. EPs. So that's our terminology. If you want to call them something other than business process, you can do that. But again, it's configurable in the tool. So let's touch on a few that some of our clients use. So things like naming conventions. So activity ID naming conventions, whether activities have names that are duplicated, which can be really confusing if you do different layouts and filtering. So we're actually saying every activity name, the description must be unique. No saying commission, that sort of thing. Okay. Activity types, so duration and units. Some of our clients want only certain activity types to be used. So this is what we're monitoring there. If anything is breaking that business process metric. Coding, whether mandatory codes have been filled in. So this is something I wish Primavera or Oracle would add to the software, is making certain codes mandatory. Now, since they don't have it, we've tried to enhance the tool with mandatory codes inside of P6-QA. On the resource level, whether we're using roles, if we're using resources, some of our clients want roles because they do corporate roll-ups. So that's why that's critical there. So this is monitoring that. Whether you're using cost accounts. So if you're integrated to other ERPs and you're doing cost control, cost accounts become very important. So this is monitoring that. Expense categories and steps. Okay, so we're monitoring all the different layers inside of P6. And again, we use a notebook to give you the full picture and the information, and then you can dig deeper at the notebook level. Okay, so you can see any of the activities that are not matching the activity ID format. Now this format is very easy to put together. So this might look a little overwhelming, but it's not too hard to understand when you look at it a little longer. So this is saying the first field is a letter. The second field is a number. And this, of course, is specific to your naming convention. Then we've got a dash. Then we've got 3 letters. Then we've got a dash, and then we've got 3 numbers. So that's the criteria. And we can build that in a field that goes along with the activity ID monitoring. Okay. So same thing that we did with putting together the schedule quality metrics. We have a business process quality metric criteria layout. Okay. So this is where we build how we're going to monitor, and the other layout is the end result. Okay, so same sort of thing that we did before. We can pick the things we want to monitor. We get a layout here. We get our standards. We put them on our templates so that the team has them starting out. And then for each specific project as needed, we can change what we want to do. We have a very simple way of flagging the mandatory codes. Again, we're taking advantage of our P6 calculator functionality embedded inside of here. And it's a very simple metric to put which code is mandatory in there. And off you go. Okay. So let me go back to the previous one and we can take a look at the mandatory coding. So let's look at this one because there's definitely some mandatory coding missing. So let me go ahead and open that up to try and explain that, because that's a very valuable one that a lot of our clients use. All our clients use that one, to be honest with you. Let me just see if I can put my hand on it. I'll just search for mandatory code. Find it. Data date, primary resource. Okay, let me just keep searching. I may have passed it. Let me just see if I scroll past it. Scheduled. Actually, it doesn't look like it's in this report. Okay, so it looks like we might have a mismatch with the report and the mandatory codes. Normally you would have those in sync. It looks like we've got something a little out of sync. So I'll go ahead and jump in and we'll find some of them inside of the actual schedule. Now I can easily open two schedules at once here, just like you would normally do. Go into your activities and you can look at the various items that you're looking for. So the mandatory codes are inside of here. Should be able to see it here. It's usually with an asterisk that we've got them highlighted. Let's just see if I've got it in my layout. Looks like here we go. Yeah. So steps missing and so on. So we're monitoring a variety of things here. So I think the mandatory codes might, if I go up to the activity codes, that'll probably be better. And you should be able to see the codes in here. We usually put a certain flag, and the flag is configurable. So it could be an asterisk. Here we go. Like this. This would be an example where the responsibility is flagged as mandatory, and that's what we're monitoring. Okay. Let me just throw that on the layout to help you understand that a little bit better and how that monitoring comes together. But let me find it. We have a lot of codes in our demo database. Oh, I think I did it wrong. Responsibility. Yes, I missed. Yep, there we go. There's one of them. So you can see we have a few things in here. Let me get it on the screen. I think that'll make it a little clearer. Yeah, there you go. So then you can see that the responsibility, which is a mandatory, needs to be filled in. Okay. Now, it's probably not the only mandatory, because as you can see in this example, it's filled in, yet we still haven't met. So there's likely additional ones that are missing. Okay. And in this example, on the bottom, you can see work type is also a mandatory that's being monitored. Okay. So the way we would do that is we just set up a layout and include those fields. Makes it much easier to pick out which ones are missing. And again, have it in the reporting engine. So you can validate activity IDs as I showed you. So this one's not matching the criteria. And it may make sense because it could be a key milestone, in which case, once again, we can do the override to let the system know that we did look at it. We're okay with it not matching the criteria. Let's not be penalized if there are a few exceptions that we're comfortable with in the analysis. Okay, I think that gives you some flavor of the BPs. And again, we're looking at whether we're using primary resources. So that's quite a handy thing in P6. So we can monitor the resource level. And the primary resource flag is sometimes used in reports as well. So you might use it in a layout, and that's where it becomes important to monitor that. Or as I mentioned, the cost account is not filled in. So you can see those are not filled in. This lets you find them very quickly. Again, yes, you could make a layout and you could find those empty ones. You could do that. But this gives us one key place to find all the metrics that are important to us and report on it. So it just makes finding these things much more repeatable, consistent, and monitorable from the management side of the project controls team. Okay, let me just touch on one more aspect. So monitoring, updating is the next really key layer of what we've built into P6-QA. Let's look at monitoring updates. So let's go to this layout and let's touch on updating. So when you get an update in from the contractor, there will be many things that you want to understand and make sure that you're taking a look at. For example, how are my durations coming together? So is my remaining duration longer than my original duration. Now that lets me know that the activities are getting extended. They may be on time, so I might have started early. I might be projecting to finish early, but my duration is getting bigger. So that could be a claim that could be ensuing because something's gone longer, which usually has an impact on the resources as well as the costs. So this is a flag that's helpful to find those very quickly. Are some of my activities finishing late? Okay, so that's an important one, of course, because they may not be on the critical path, but it could be showing a pattern of things taking longer or going late. Looking at negative floats, of course, looking at whether my resources are going over. Am I missing resources? Meaning the actuals. So we have resources on the activity, the activity started, but they didn't put any actuals in. So these are the types of things that you want to monitor and you want reporting on. Is my data date after, is my data date before my actual date? Okay, so that helps you monitor whether they put an actual date in the future. Okay, which may be okay because they might have said we're going to finish this week, but you want to make sure that there's no mistakes in the actual reporting. So that just helps you find those real quick. Okay, so the criteria is set up in the exact same manner as the others, but let's go in and actually look at how you can see these and use them to critique and update on the schedule. Okay, so again, I use matching layouts to make it really easy, really repeatable. My schedulers don't have to go mess around with layouts every time they get a new schedule. And of course, you can have filters that focus right in on the problem areas. I'm keeping the filters light in this scenario. So here we can see right away that our durations are, the remaining duration is more than my original duration. I could monitor against my plan or against my baseline. So you have both aspects available in QA. So I can see those very quickly. And of course, it's not necessarily that it's a problem and you want to fix it, but you want to see it. You want to make sure you're analyzing it. And even above and beyond that, I'd be putting a note on it right away, whether I use a notebook or whether I use a user-defined to explain at the time why this activity went over, okay? Now, I didn't mention the first 5 years of my career was in claims. So I'm a big believer of documenting as you go. It's not only important for negotiations and ongoing discussions, but it's really important if you do find yourself at the end of the day in a dispute or a claim. And generally, the group that's documented well as they went have a very big advantage in winning their claim. Okay, so this helps you avoid disputes, document as you go, and make sure you're critiquing as you go. Because it could genuinely be an error in the data entry like we saw in my previous example where the logic was just incorrect. I had put it as a successor rather than a predecessor. So it helps you pick up those, innocent mistakes, just typing mistakes. And it also helps you document true legitimate issues as you go. So there's one example, resources over budget. Well, it's not that surprising if our duration went long, that our resources have gone long. So again, I can see that. And yes, there's a way I could probably filter this, not necessarily very easily, but this helps highlight it and make it very repeatable. Okay. So those are some examples. And of course, our data date being before our actual date. So that's an important one. So my start date here is the 26th of June, and my data date here is May. Okay. Now this, again, could just be an innocent thing that I have forgotten to move my data date, or it could be that they're forecasting in advance, or it could be a mistake. Okay, so again, it just helps you find those much quicker than having to run reports, do a bunch of layouts and filters, and dig through them. Okay, so we're trying to make it easier and easier for a newer person using P6, just easier all around on using P6. Okay, so I think I've highlighted enough different aspects of the QA tool, why we built it, the way we've tried to attack it to make it very easy to critique a schedule you receive very quickly, and also to self-critique if you're building schedules and have a team building schedules. So it's not the scheduling lead that needs to do all that analysis, either in P6 or in third-party tools that really slow down the process, create bottlenecks in your ability to put schedules together effectively. Okay, that was our objective here. Okay, now, if you do have any questions that you think I might need to show you in the software, go ahead and throw those in there. I'm going to jump back to the presentation and do a wrap up. But if you do have any questions or specific things you want to understand a bit better, feel free to chat them into the question room. Okay, so I think I've highlighted the way the tool works, how I think it's quite easy to use. You know, that's a big important thing when we put tools together. All our tools, P6 Loader, Scrubber, our reporting engines, our calculator tool, they're easy to use. And the idea is to make the users of P6 lives better. So some of the feedback, definitely not a full-time scheduler, a finance person, but they can easily see the P6-QA, the reports, and how easy it is to digest the information. And that is a case study that I'll explain in a bit more detail. The ability to have better standards and repeatability in the scheduling world so that you're not arguing about a lead and a lag and what they are and whether you should or shouldn't have them. This just takes some of those discussions away, sets standards across the board, and off you go. And gives the scheduler the ability to self-critique. So that's an important thing. They're not waiting for their lead to help them dig through problems, and they're able to find them themselves. The critical path not being reliable and validating large schedules very quickly. I will touch on that in a case study that is a client that I worked with in the next slide. So in terms of case studies, we have quite a few, but let me just touch on some key examples. So I worked on a huge project in New York City. The developer was not, was a smaller developer relative to maybe some very large organizations, but this was a very big project. It was a 80-story building, multi-use with retail, hotel, and very, very fancy condo units right at the top. So very expensive project. The developer was not an expert in scheduling, and the finance person was the CFO that I was working with. So we were helping them develop criteria to critique the schedules that they were receiving. So I literally ran P6-QA on an 8,000 activity schedule. The developer didn't want to spend very much money, as if you work in that space, you know, is pretty common. So we just ran QA on it. We gave the reports, and I could see very clearly that the critical path did not make any sense. Logic was missing. There was a lot of open ends. Durations were quite all over the map. You know, we have 1 day durations and months long. So I did a very quick software service analysis for them. And immediately that gave the CFO the confidence to go and bring back to the contractor that the schedule was not acceptable. They needed to do more work on it, and we help them critique subsequent uh, inputs. Okay, so this is one example of a major project and how we used it with that major project. We also have seen P6-QA invaluable on programs. So we've got a large engineering company in the US, Garver Engineering, using it for several of their clients. So they're running their program management system, and the client is providing the local resources. So the site engineers are doing the critiques with the P6-QA tool, and these guys are not schedulers. So they are closest to the job, they get the schedule in, they load it in, P6-QA runs, and they are giving the inputs to the contractors where they're not meeting the schedule criteria as well as the business process criteria, and they have a lot of them. We had lots of discussions on what a dangling activity was and how to analyze durations and so on. So all that work, legwork, and all those smarts from some of the scheduling folks from Garver that have 30, 40 years experience, we put it into the QA tool, and their client is able to take advantage of that very quickly and analyze the updates that they're receiving, in some cases weekly, in other cases every 2 weeks. So they've got a lot of schedules coming in. There's over 100 coming in every single week. They can do them in literally no time. So it's saving a huge amount of work for them, and it's very repeatable. So there's no discussion on whether, you're picking on me, you just don't like me, you don't like my company, so you're giving me a hard time. All of that is gone because it's so repeatable, and it really brings a high level of confidence, and it just makes the ability to critique the schedules much, much cleaner. Okay, so those are two really good examples. We've got others where we're running the tool for large IT groups that have large programs, lots of inter-project links, and they need some real strong ability to critique schedules quickly. Okay, so hopefully this has highlighted some of the things that you could potentially do with the software. So if you're seeing things that are of interest, please reach out to us. Let us know when you exit if you would like us to reach out to you by phone, or whether you want to schedule a meeting to understand it better, see whether there's a fit there. And the fit could just be us helping you run it as a service, as a first start. If you need to convince some management of the potential value. And we've done that way for other clients as well. Okay, well, so far it doesn't look like any questions, which hopefully that means it's kind of self-explanatory, it's straightforward, which was, of course, a key criteria for us when we built it. If you do think of any questions, throw them in the chat, or you can certainly follow up afterwards. So I do want to thank you for spending the last hour with us. Hopefully you saw something of value. We do have a lot of tools, and our business, we've been doing this for 27 years as a Primavera partner, and then of course an Oracle partner. We're also a Safran partner, and we were a Partmaster partner first and foremost. So our background in working in this space is very, very deep. And we started with the programming team. And that's why we have so many tools, because our focus then, and still is, has been on integrations, automations, and just making the tools easier to work with and take best advantage of. Because we've definitely seen clients reluctant to put resources and costs in there because they thought it would be too hard to manage. But once you do an integration, or you use P6 Loader to load data from other systems, that changes the dynamic and the value that they're able to get out of the Oracle tools. Now, today we were focused on P6, but we do Unifier, AConnects, and the other Oracle tools as well. So definitely feel free to reach out to me. My email is there. You can also just go on our website and explore our tools more. Hopefully you got some value out of the session today, the 1 hour you spent with us, and we've got other webinars coming up. So feel free to reach out that way on our website. We also do send mailers to let you know what's coming up. And the focus is to make your ability to run your projects just that much stronger, much easier. So you don't have to be 30 years in the business to be able to show that you can understand and analyze a schedule, is why we put P6-QA together. Okay, great. Well, I'll stay on for another minute or two. If any questions come to mind, go ahead and chat them in. I'll stop the recording now and wait a few minutes, and we'll log off after that. So thanks for joining us.